Snow clung to Elena Whitmore's eyelashes like tiny crystals, blurring the world into a delicate mosaic of gray and white. She knelt quietly beside the low smoldering fire, her hands raw from the cold fingers, shaking as she pressed fresh bandages against Little Fox's pale, clammy skin. Around her, the forest breathed softly branches, whispering secrets she could no longer bear to hear. She lifted her head, listening past the wind's quiet sigh to catch the fragile rhythm of the girl's heartbeat. Every faint pulse echoed Elena's own desperate prayer, "Hold on, stay with me." She felt the weight of the small wooden flower pinned over her heart, a reminder of promises made in sunlight and silence. Promises she was terrified she couldn't keep. The distant crack of a branch snapped her attention outward. Elena froze, breath-shallow, eyes wide. The gentle warmth she'd felt just moments ago now vanished, leaving only icy dread. Someone was coming, and in that quiet, infinite second, Elena realized that for all her knowledge of healing, she'd never truly learned how to mend a broken world. September 1879, Colorado Territory. The wagon wheels carved deep ruts into the mountain path. Elena Whitmore pulled her wool coat tighter against the autumn wind that swept down from the peaks. 3 weeks had passed since Silverdale. 3 weeks since the massacre that painted the newspapers red with headlines and left the territory holding its breath. She pressed her palm against the leather medical bag beside her. Inside, morphine bandages, surgical instruments, tools of healing in a land that seemed to know only wounds. "Almost there, miss." The driver's voice cut through the wind. "Fort Garland's just past that ridge." Elena nodded but said nothing. She'd spoken little since leaving Denver. Words felt hollow now. Everything felt hollow. The mountain air was thin and sharp. It burned her lungs with each breath. At least that was real. At least that was something she could feel. Her fingers found the telegram in her coat pocket, worn soft from folding and unfolding. Medical assistance required. Stop Silverdale survivors. Stop immediate departure. Stop survivors. The word carried hope like a flickering candle in the dark. The wagon crested the ridge. Below, Fort Garland spread across the valley floor. Adobe walls, wooden towers. The American flag snapping in the wind like a prayer made of cloth. Elena closed her eyes. When she opened them, she would begin again. When she opened them, she would remember why she came to this wilderness in the first place. To heal, to save, to matter. Even if she could not save herself. The infirmary smelled of carbolic acid and death. Colonel Harrison sat behind his desk uniform, pressed metals gleaming, but his eyes held the weight of 3 weeks without sleep. "Miss Whitmore," he stood when she entered. "Thank you for coming." "How many survivors?" "3 confirmed. 1?" He paused. "1 may not last the night." Elena set down her bag. "Where are they?" "The investigation site. Silverdale's a half-day ride north. But I must warn you what you'll see there." His voice trailed off. "I've seen death before, Colonel." But even as she said it, Elena wondered if that was true. Had she really seen death? Or had she simply been running from it so long that everything else looked like shadows? "Very well." Harrison moved to the window. "You'll have an escort. Sergeant Mills knows the way." "What about the other 2 survivors?" "Dead, buried yesterday." The words fell like stones. "The one remaining. She's been asking for someone. Keep saying a name." "What name?" "Sarah. Sarah Montgomery." Elena frowned. "She's asking for herself." "No." Harrison turned back to her. "She is Sarah Montgomery. She's asking for someone else. Someone named Elena." The room went cold. Elena's hands trembled as she reached for her bag. "I need to leave now." "Miss Whitmore, are you?" "Now." Silverdale lay like a broken promise in the valley. Elena rode beside Sergeant Mills through the charred remains of what had once been home to 37 souls. Now it was ash and memory. "Happened at dawn," Mills said. His voice was steady, professional. "Raiders came from the east. Apache, they think. Or maybe Ute. Hard to tell when everyone's dead." Elena studied the burned cabins, the scattered belongings. A child's doll lay face down in the dirt, its dress singed black. "Where did you find her?" "Root cellar, behind the Montgomery place." Mills pointed to a collapsed cabin near the creek. "Smart woman. Played dead for 16 hours before we arrived." They dismounted near the ruins. Elena knelt beside the cellar entrance. Dark stains marked the wooden boards, blood long since dried. She was barely breathing when we pulled her out, Mills continued. Stab wound to the chest, burns on her arms, but alive. Elena touched the splintered wood. How did she know my name? You'll have to ask her yourself, miss. A sound drifted across the settlement, low and mournful, like wind through broken glass. Elena looked up. What was that? Mills frowned. What? The sound came again, closer now, a voice singing in a language Elena didn't recognize. Do you hear that? Miss, I don't hear anything. Elena stood slowly. The singing stopped, but she could feel eyes watching from the tree line. The cabin stood hidden in a grove of aspen trees 3 miles from Silverdale. Elena followed the voice. It had led her here, though she couldn't explain how or why. Mills had refused to come, said he had orders to return to the fort before dark. She went alone. The singing grew clearer as she approached. Male voice, deep and sorrowful, words that seemed to carry the weight of mountains. Elena tied her horse to a branch and walked the final yards on foot. The cabin was small, rough-hewn logs chinked with mud. Smoke rose from the chimney. She knocked on the door. The singing stopped. Footsteps inside. Heavy boots on wooden floors. The door opened. Elena found herself looking up at a man who seemed carved from the landscape itself. Tall and lean with dark hair that caught the fading light. His skin was bronzed by sun and wind. His eyes were the color of river stones. But it was his hands she noticed most. Gentle hands. Healer's hands. You're hurt, he said. Elena blinked. I'm sorry. You're breathing. Shallow. Painful. He stepped aside. Come. I'm looking for Sarah Montgomery. I know. Elena's heart stopped. Is she alive? Barely. He gestured into the cabin. She's been asking for you. Elena hesitated. This man was Indian, Ute probably. In the wake of Silverdale, that should have terrified her. Instead, she felt only curiosity. And something else. Something like recognition. Who are you? She asked. Swift River. He met her eyes. I'm the one who found her. The cabin's interior was warm and clean. Herbs hung from the rafters. A fire crackled in the stone hearth. Sarah Montgomery lay on a bed near the window. Her face was pale as parchment, her breathing shallow, but her eyes were open and alert. Elena. Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. You came. Elena knelt beside the bed. How do you know my name? Your reputation precedes you even here. Sarah tried to smile. The nurse from Boston who came west for her health. Though we both know that's not the whole truth, is it? Elena's hands found Sarah's wrist. Pulse weak but steady. I don't understand. Marcus told me about you. The world tilted. Elena pulled back as if burned. Marcus. Dr. Marcus Thorne. He spoke of you often. His most promising student. Sarah's eyes searched Elena's face. Until you disappeared. Swift River moved closer. Elena could feel his presence behind her, solid and reassuring. He's here, Sarah continued. In Colorado, though he goes by a different name now. Elena's medical bag slipped from her fingers. The contents scattered across the floor. Morphine vials, bandages, instruments that gleamed like accusations in the firelight. That's impossible. Her voice broke. Marcus is in Boston. He's the one who ordered the attack on Silverdale. The cabin spun. Elena gripped the bed frame to keep from falling. Swift River's hand touched her shoulder. Steady, warm, real. Breathe, he said quietly. Elena forced air into her lungs. Once, twice. The world slowly stopped tilting. Why? She whispered. Sarah reached under her pillow with trembling fingers. She pulled out a small red leather book, its pages yellow with age. Because of this. Swift River lit another candle. The cabin filled with dancing shadows. Elena opened the red book with shaking hands. The pages were covered in careful handwriting. Maps, dates, numbers. It belonged to my husband, Sarah said. Thomas was a surveyor. He found something he wasn't supposed to find. Elena studied the maps. They showed the mountains north of Silverdale, Areas marked as government survey, restricted access. But there were other markings too, in different ink, different handwriting. Cherokee Gold Mine, 1847-1849, was written across one section. Below it, sealed by federal order, sacred burial ground. The government closed that mine 30 years ago, Sarah continued. Said it was played out, but Thomas found evidence they were still working it, in secret. Elena turned the page. More maps, more dates, and photographs. The photographs made her stomach turn. Bodies, Native Americans, men, women, children, lying beside a contaminated stream. The mine runoff poisoned the water, Sarah whispered. Killed an entire village. The government covered it up, called it a cholera outbreak. Swift River had gone very still. Elena looked up at him. Did you know? His voice was barely audible. That's where my daughter died. Swift River sat by the fire, his back straight, his hands folded in his lap. Singing Wind. He spoke the name like a prayer. 8 years old, the bravest little soul you ever saw. Elena set the red book aside and moved closer to him. She loved flowers, he continued, would pick them every morning and bring them to me. Dandelions mostly. Sometimes wild roses, if she was lucky. His hand moved to his chest, pressing against something hidden beneath his shirt. The water looked clean, crystal clear. She was thirsty after playing in the sun. Swift River's voice was steady, but Elena could hear the pain beneath it. I should have known. Should have tested it first. You couldn't have known, Elena said softly. I'm a medicine man. It's my job to know. From the bed, Sarah's voice joined them. How long ago? 2 years, 3 months, 16 days. The cabin fell silent, except for the crackling fire. Elena thought of Marcus, of the things she'd discovered in his laboratory, the bodies, the experiments, the patients who went in healthy and came out in pieces. We're all carrying something, she said. Swift River looked at her. What are you carrying? Elena was quiet for a long moment. Outside, wind moved through the aspen trees. Their leaves whispered secrets to the darkness. I was his star pupil, she said finally. Marcus Thorne. He taught me surgery, anatomy, how to save lives. She paused, drew breath. I thought he was a genius, until I found the room. What room? Sarah asked. The basement laboratory, hidden behind his office. Elena's hands clenched into fists. He was killing them. Healthy people. Immigrants mostly. People no one would miss. He'd drug them, perform experiments, then sell their organs to medical colleges. Swift River's jaw tightened. I gathered evidence. Planned to go to the police. Elena's voice broke. But he found out. Said if I told anyone, he'd make sure I joined his collection. So I ran. To Colorado. To Colorado. Elena nodded. Told everyone I had consumption. Needed the mountain air. Anything to get far enough away that he couldn't find me. Sarah's breathing had grown labored. Elena moved back to check her pulse. He found you anyway, Sarah whispered. So it seems. Swift River stood and moved to the window. He peered out at the darkness beyond. We need to move her, he said. Soon. She's too weak to travel. If she stays here, she dies. He turned back to them. And so do we. Elena woke to the sound of horses. She sat up on the small cot where she'd been sleeping. Swift River was already awake, standing by the window with a rifle in his hands. How many? She whispered. 3, maybe 4. Outside, the horses had stopped. Elena could hear men's voices, low and careful. Sarah stirred on her bed. What's happening? Quiet, Swift River murmured. A voice called out from the darkness. We know you're in there. Send out the woman and nobody gets hurt. Elena's blood went cold. The accent was wrong. Too refined. Too educated. Boston accent, she breathed. Swift River nodded grimly. You have 30 seconds, the voice continued. Then we come in shooting. Elena looked around the cabin. 1 door, 2 windows. No other way out. The root cellar, Swift River said quietly. Behind the fireplace. Take Sarah. What about you? I'll hold them off. No. Elena grabbed his arm. We go together or not at all. Swift River studied her face in the candlelight. Something passed between them. understanding maybe, or trust. 20 seconds. Swift River moved to the fireplace and pushed aside a loose stone. Behind it was a narrow opening just wide enough for a person to crawl through. It leads to the creek, he said. Follow the water north for half a mile, then east until you reach the old mine road. Elena helped Sarah sit up. The woman was burning with fever now, her skin slick with sweat. 10 seconds. I can't leave you, Elena said. Swift River pressed something into her hand, small and wooden, carved into the shape of a flower. For luck, he said. Then the shooting started. Elena dragged Sarah through the tunnel as gunfire erupted behind them. The space was narrow and dark. Tree roots hung down like grasping fingers. The air smelled of earth and old water. Behind them she could hear men shouting, the crash of breaking furniture, Swift River's voice sharp and commanding. Then silence. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. She wanted to go back, wanted to help. But Sarah was growing heavier with each step, her breathing more labored. They reached the end of the tunnel. Elena pushed aside the wooden cover and emerged into the night air beside the creek. The water was shallow and fast-moving. It would hide their tracks. Elena pulled Sarah into the stream. The cold water was a shock, but it would keep them awake, keep them moving. Elena, Sarah's voice was fading. The book. Elena's hand went to her coat pocket. The red book was still there, wrapped in oilcloth. I have it. Good. Don't let them. Sarah collapsed. Elena caught her holding her friend's weight against the current. Sarah's eyes were closed, her breathing barely visible. She was dying. Elena looked back toward the cabin. No lights, no movement. Swift River was either dead or captured. She was alone. Elena hefted Sarah higher and began walking upstream. One step, then another. The water tugged at her boots, tried to pull her down, but she kept moving. Behind her, the cabin began to burn. Elena found the mine road just as the first gray light of dawn touched the mountain peaks. Sarah had stopped breathing 20 minutes earlier. Elena laid her friend's body gently beside the road and closed her eyes. She'd done what she could. It hadn't been enough. It was never enough. The red book felt heavy in her pocket. All those secrets, all that death. And for what Elena sat down beside Sarah's body and wept. She wept for Sarah and Thomas Montgomery, for Singing Wind and the Poison Stream, for the 37 souls of Silverdale, for every patient Marcus had murdered in his basement laboratory. And she wept for herself, for the naive young woman who'd believed that knowledge and skill were enough to save the world. The sun rose higher. Elena knew she needed to move. The men would find this road eventually, would find Sarah's body, would find her. But she couldn't seem to stand, couldn't seem to care anymore. A sound made her look up. Hoofbeats, coming from the south. Elena scrambled to her feet and looked around for cover. There was nowhere to run. The road stretched empty in both directions, bordered by open meadows. The rider came into view around a bend. It was Swift River. Elena's knees nearly buckled with relief. He was alive. Wounded, she could see blood on his shirt, but alive. He dismounted and walked toward her. His eyes took in Sarah's body. Elena's tear-streaked face, the way she held herself like something broken. I'm sorry, he said simply. Elena nodded. Words felt impossible. We need to bury her. Yes. Swift River began gathering stones. Elena helped him, working in silence as the sun climbed higher. Together they built a small cairn over Sarah Montgomery's body. When they finished, Swift River placed a wildflower on top of the stones. Elena added the wooden carving he'd given her. What now? She asked. Swift River mounted his horse and extended his hand to her. Now we make them pay. Elena looked back at the cairn one last time. Then she took Swift River's hand and let him pull her up behind him. Together they rode toward Fort Garland, toward the truth, toward the man who called himself Colonel Harrison, but had once been Dr. Marcus Thorne. The ride to Fort Garland took 3 hours. Elena sat behind Swift River on his horse, the red book pressed against her chest like a shield. The morning sun climbed higher, burning off the mountain mist, but the cold seemed to come from inside her bones. Sarah was dead. The words repeated in her mind with each hoofbeat. Dead because she'd trusted Elena. Dead because she'd tried to expose the truth. Just like all the others. Stop, Swift River said suddenly. Elena looked up. They'd reached a creek that wound down from the high peaks. The water was crystal clear, running over smooth stones. The horses need water, he said, but Elena knew that wasn't why he'd stopped. She could feel the tension in his shoulders, the careful way he scanned the tree line. They dismounted. Swift River led his horse to the water's edge while Elena sat on a fallen log and opened the red book again. More photographs, more maps, more evidence of 30 years of government lies. This mine, she said. Singing Wind, was this where she died? Swift River's hands stilled on the horse's reins. Half a mile upstream. Elena studied the photographs again. The bodies beside the poisoned stream. Men, women, children. All of them someone's daughter. Someone's son. How many, she asked. 43. His voice was flat, empty. My wife was one of them. Elena's breath caught. Your wife. Morning Star. Singing Wind's mother. Swift River knelt by the water and cupped it in his hands. She went to gather healing plants by the stream, the old places where the medicine was strong. He let the water run through his fingers. I found them 3 days later. All of them. Elena closed the book and moved to sit beside him. The creek babbled, softly innocent as a child's laughter. The army said it was cholera. Swift River continued. Said they died from bad water. They weren't wrong, just not honest about why the water was bad. Is that when you learned English to find out what really happened? I already spoke English. Learned it from missionaries when I was young. Swift River's mouth twisted into something that wasn't quite a smile. They wanted to save my soul. Instead, they taught me to read their lies. Elena thought about Marcus, about all the papers he'd published, all the medical journals that praised his innovative techniques, built on the bones of his victims. We're the same, she said quietly. Swift River looked at her. How? We both trusted people who turned out to be monsters. No. His voice was firm. You tried to stop him. I just let it happen. You couldn't have known. I should have. Swift River stood and walked back to his horse. I'm supposed to protect my people. Instead, I let them die while I was off hunting for answers that didn't matter. Elena followed him. What do you mean? I was tracking the source of the poison for weeks, following the water, testing everything, playing detective instead of medicine man. His hands clenched into fists. If I'd been with them, maybe I could have died with them. Elena's voice cut through his self-recrimination. That's all you could have done. Die with them. Swift River stared at her. Something shifted in his eyes, a crack in the wall he'd built around his grief. The night I found Marcus's laboratory, Elena continued, I had a choice. I could have confronted him immediately, could have tried to save the man on his table. What did you do? I ran, gathered evidence for 3 days before I tried to go to the police. Elena's voice broke. The man died while I was collecting proof. I chose documentation over action, and he paid the price. They stood facing each other across the small clearing, two people carrying the weight of impossible choices. We can't bring them back, Elena said finally. No, but we can stop it from happening again. Swift River nodded slowly. He pulled something from his shirt pocket, a small wooden pin, carved in the shape of a flower, the same design as the one he'd given her the night before. Singing Wind made this for me, he said, the day before she died. Said flowers only bloom when the earth is safe. Elena reached out and touched the carving. The wood was smooth from handling, warm from being kept close to his heart. She was wise. Yes. Swift River tucked the pin back into his pocket. She would have liked you. Something passed between them then. Not romance, it was too soon for that, too raw. But understanding, recognition, the beginning of trust between two wounded souls. We should go, Elena said, before they find Sarah's body. Swift River helped her back onto the horse. As they rode away from the creek, Elena looked back once at the clear water running over stones. Somewhere upstream, poison still leaked from the Cherokee mine. But not for much longer. 2 hours later, they could see Fort Garland's walls rising from the valley floor. Elena's stomach clenched as they approached the gates. Somewhere inside those walls was Marcus Thorne, wearing a different name, like a disguise. How long had he been here? How many people had died while she'd been hiding in the wilderness, too afraid to face him? Elena. She looked up, Swift River had stopped the horse just outside rifle range of the fort. "There's something you need to know," he said. "About your Dr. Thorne. Well, I've been tracking him for 2 years, ever since I learned he was the one who approved the mine operation." Elena's blood went cold. "You knew, you knew he was here." "I knew someone named Marcus Cross was the Army physician who signed off on the water safety reports. Someone who'd been transferred from Boston 3 years ago." Swift River's voice was careful, controlled. "I didn't know he was your Marcus Thorne until last night. It proves part of it. But we need more. We need witnesses, documentation, evidence that can't be buried or burned." "You want to go in there?" It wasn't a question. "We have to. If we just disappear into the mountains, he'll keep killing. The mine will keep poisoning the water. And Sarah Montgomery will have died for nothing." Elena thought about Sarah's last words, about the fever that had taken her in the end, about the cairn of stones they'd left beside the old mine road. "How do we get inside without being recognized?" Swift River smiled, but there was no humor in it. "Leave that to me." An hour later, Elena barely recognized herself. Swift River had led her to a trader's camp 2 miles from the fort. For $3 silver and Elena's medical bag, he'd bought them new clothes and identities. Elena now wore a faded blue dress and bonnet, her hair braided and pinned beneath a white cap. To anyone looking, she was just another settler's wife seeking medical attention for her husband. Swift River had transformed even more dramatically. Gone were his buckskins and braided hair. He now wore wool trousers, a white shirt, and a black hat. His hair was loose around his shoulders, and he'd somehow darkened his skin to look more Hispanic than Native American. "Miguel Santos," he said, testing the accent. "Cattle rancher from New Mexico. My wife is very sick, needs to see the army doctor." Elena practiced looking pale and coughing delicately into her handkerchief. It wasn't hard. The stress of the last day had left her feeling genuinely ill. "What if someone recognizes you?" "They won't. I've been careful to stay out of sight for the past 2 years. Swift River adjusted his hat. "Besides, to most white people, all Indians look the same. Without my traditional clothes, I'm just another Mexican cowboy." Elena hated that he was right, hated the casual racism that would be their shield. "Once we're inside, we find Cross, get him to confess, record everything we can." Swift River patted a bulge under his jacket. "I have a recording device, new invention from back east." Elena stared at him. "You have a what?" "Thomas Edison's phonograph, portable model. Cost me 3 months' worth of fur trading, but it works." Swift River's smile was grim. "Turns out being a savage has its advantages. People don't expect you to understand modern technology." "How do we get him to confess?" "You're going to tell him you've been thinking about his offer." Elena's blood ran cold. "What offer?" "To join his collection." The words hit her like a physical blow. Elena sat down hard on a nearby rock, her vision swimming. "Elena." Swift River was beside her instantly, his hand on her shoulder. "He said that," she whispered. "The night I found the laboratory. He said I could join them if I told anyone." "I know. I heard you say it last night. But if I go to him, if I pretend to accept, he'll try to kill you." "Yes." Swift River's voice was gentle but firm. "That's when we'll have him." Elena looked up at him. "That's insane. It's the only way. He's too smart to confess without provocation. But his arrogance, that's his weakness. He'll want to gloat, want to explain how clever he's been. And if something goes wrong, then I kill him anyway." Elena searched his face for some sign that he was joking. She found none. Swift River. "My name is Miguel Santos, and my wife needs to see the doctor." Fort Garland's infirmary was exactly as Elena remembered it from the day before, except now she knew that the man behind the desk wasn't Colonel Harrison. He looked up when they entered, the same face she'd known in Boston, the same sharp eyes and careful hands, but he wore a major's uniform now, and his hair had gone gray at the temples. "Major Cross," Swift River said in his Mexican accent. "My wife, she is very sick. Please, you must help her." Cross's eyes moved to Elena. She kept her head down, coughing softly into her handkerchief. "What seems to be the problem?" "Fever," Swift River replied. "Coughing blood. We fear it is the consumption." Cross stood and moved around the desk. Elena forced herself to remain still as he approached. "Let me have a look." His hands were exactly as she remembered them. Surgeon's hands. Killer's hands. He lifted her chin to examine her throat. Elena looked directly into his eyes for the first time in 3 years. Recognition flashed across his face like lightning. "Well, well," Cross said softly. "Elena Whitmore, my dear departed student." Swift River tensed beside her, ready to act. But Cross just smiled. "Please sit down, both of you. We have so much to catch up on." Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. He was supposed to be surprised off balance. Instead, he seemed delighted. "I must say, I'm impressed," Cross continued, settling back behind his desk. "I'd heard reports of a mysterious nurse treating survivors of the Silverdale incident, but I never imagined it was you." "You killed them," Elena whispered. "Killed them. My dear Elena, I saved them from the tedium of frontier life, just as I saved my patients in Boston from the burden of their meaningless existence." Elena felt sick. They were innocent people. "No one is innocent." Cross opened a drawer and pulled out a leather-bound journal. "Take your friend Mr. Santos here, for instance." Swift River went very still. "Did you think I wouldn't recognize you?" Cross asked pleasantly. "Swift River of the Ute people, also known as the man who's been stalking me for 2 years." The trap slammed shut around them. Cross pulled a gun from the same drawer. A Colt revolver, silver-plated and deadly. "Now then," he said, "shall we discuss why you're really here?" "You want to know about the mine," Cross said. It wasn't a question. Elena and Swift River sat in chairs facing his desk. The gun lay between Cross's hands, casual but ready. "You want to understand how a Boston surgeon became a frontier army officer. How the Cherokee gold mine connects to missing drifters and poisoned streams." Cross leaned back in his chair. Elena could see the familiar gleam in his eyes, the look he got when he was about to explain something he was particularly proud of. "It started with a simple observation," he continued. "Medical schools pay handsomely for fresh cadavers, but Boston has laws, oversight, pesky regulations about where bodies come from." Elena's stomach turned. "So you came west, where life is cheap and people disappear all the time, where a respected army physician can conduct research without interference." Cross smiled. "But then I discovered something even more profitable than cadavers." He opened the leather journal and turned it toward them. The pages were filled with diagrams, chemical formulas, test results. "Gold extraction using mercury amalgamation produces toxic runoff," Cross explained. "But with the right filtration process, that runoff can be concentrated into a very potent poison." Swift River's hands clenched into fists. "You've been using the mine to manufacture poison, among other things. The beauty of mercury poisoning is that it mimics natural disease, cholera, consumption, even madness." Cross turned another page. "The military applications alone are worth millions." Elena understood now. "You're selling poison to the army. To certain progressive elements within the army, yes. Officers who understand that frontier warfare requires unconventional solutions, like wiping out entire villages, like solving the Indian problem efficiently." Cross's voice hardened. "Your people are standing in the way of progress, Mr. River. My methods simply accelerate the inevitable." Elena felt bile rise in her throat. This was worse than she'd imagined. Marcus wasn't just a serial killer, he was a war criminal. "The missing drifters," she said. "You're testing the poison on them. Quality control is essential. Can't have defective products reaching our customers." Cross closed the journal. "Which brings us to your current situation." He picked up the gun. "You see, you've both learned far too much to be allowed to leave. But waste not, want not, you'll make excellent test subjects for my latest formula." Elena's mind raced. The phonograph was hidden in Swift River's jacket, but had it recorded enough, would anyone believe what they'd heard? "Before you kill us," she said, "I want to know something." Cross raised an eyebrow. "How considerate of you to ask. The night I found your laboratory in Boston, you said I could join your collection if I told anyone about what I'd seen." Elena met his eyes. "Did you mean it?" Cross laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "My dear Elena, you misunderstood. You were never going to join my collection." He leaned forward. "You were going to replace me. The words hit her like a physical blow. Replace you? I'd been planning to relocate for months. The authorities were getting suspicious. I needed someone to take over the Boston operation while I established myself elsewhere. Cross's smile was poisonous. Who better than my most gifted student with the right motivation? You could have continued my work indefinitely. Elena felt the room spinning. I would never. You would have, eventually. People are remarkably adaptable when their survival depends on it. Cross stood and moved around the desk. But you chose to run instead. How disappointing. Swift River shifted in his chair. Elena could see him calculating distances, looking for an opening. Don't, Cross said without looking at him. I may be a surgeon, but I'm also an excellent shot. Now where were we? He stopped directly in front of Elena's chair. Ah yes, your new role as a test subject. I think we'll start with the respiratory formula. See how long it takes to... The door burst open. Colonel Harrison stepped into the room, followed by 3 soldiers with rifles. Major Cross, Harrison said, you're under arrest. The phonograph sat on Harrison's desk like a mechanical miracle. Elena watched as the colonel adjusted the needle and started the wax cylinder spinning. Swift River's recorded voice filled the room, speaking in perfect English. I want to know about the mine. Then Cross's voice, clear and damning. Medical schools pay handsomely for fresh cadavers. But Boston has laws. Harrison stopped the machine. How long have you been recording Army personnel? Just him, Swift River replied. And only for the last hour. Elena stared at him. How did you know Harrison would come? I sent him a message this morning, before we entered the fort. What message? Swift River reached into his pocket and pulled out a small piece of paper. Elena recognized her own handwriting. When did you... While you were changing clothes at the trader's camp. You'd left some papers in your coat pocket. Swift River handed the note to Harrison, including this letter from the Denver Medical Board. Elena's breath caught. She'd forgotten about that letter, the one requesting her assistance with an investigation into suspicious deaths among frontier settlements. You're Dr. Elena Whitmore, Harrison said. It wasn't a question. Yes. The physician who exposed the organ harvesting ring in Boston 3 years ago? Elena blinked. I didn't expose anything. I ran. Your evidence reached the police eventually. Anonymous tip that led to the arrest of Dr. Marcus Thorne and his associates. Harrison leaned back in his chair. Did you think we wouldn't investigate when a wanted fugitive turned up as an army major? The pieces clicked into place. You knew who he was. We suspected, but we needed proof. Harrison gestured to the phonograph. Now we have it. Swift River spoke up. What about the mine? Shut down as of this morning. The contaminated water will be diverted and treated. Harrison's voice was grim. It'll take years to clean up the damage, but it's a start. Elena felt something loosen in her chest, a knot she'd been carrying for 3 years. What happens now? Cross will be transported to Denver for trial, federal charges for the poison water murder, charges for the missing drifters. Harrison stood. As for you two, you're free to go. Elena looked at Swift River. He was staring out the window at the mountains beyond the fort. Where will you go? She asked. Home, to bury my daughter properly, to tell my people they can use the old water sources again. He turned to her. What about you? Elena thought about Boston, about the life she'd left behind, the medical practice she'd abandoned. I don't know. Harrison cleared his throat. If I may suggest, the territory needs physicians. Real physicians who understand that healing means more than just treating white settlers. Elena looked at him. What are you saying? I'm saying there's a position open for a doctor who can work with both the army and the local tribes. Someone who speaks English and, he glanced at Swift River, has connections to the native community. Swift River's expression didn't change, but Elena caught the slight nod he gave her. It would mean staying in Colorado, Harrison continued. Probably never going back to Boston. Elena thought about the life she'd imagined for herself, the prestigious hospital position, the research opportunities, the respect of her medical colleagues. Then she thought about Sarah Montgomery dying in a hidden cabin while murderers burned her home, about singing wind, gathering flowers by a poisoned stream, about all the people who needed healing in this hard, beautiful country. I'll take it, she said. 3 days later, Elena stood beside a new grave in the Ute burial ground. Swift River knelt before the small stone marker, his hands gentle as he arranged wildflowers around its base. Behind him, members of his tribe gathered in a circle, singing the old songs in voices that carried across the mountain valley. Elena couldn't understand the words, but she felt their meaning: grief and love, and the promise that death was not the end. "What are they saying?" she asked softly. "That singing wind has found the place where flowers bloom forever," Swift River replied. "Where the water runs clean and children never grow sick." He stood and brushed dirt from his hands. Around them, the singing continued. "Will you stay with your people now?" Elena asked. "For a while, there's healing to be done. Trust to rebuild." Swift River looked at her. "But I'll come back. To Fort Garland. To wherever you are." The words hung between them like a bridge neither was quite ready to cross. But Elena could see the possibility of it, the potential for something deeper than shared trauma. "I'm going to set up a clinic," she said, "in the valley below the fort, somewhere accessible to everyone. Army and civilian, Army and civilian, white and native, anyone who needs healing." Swift River nodded slowly. Singing Wind would approve. Elena reached into her pocket and pulled out the wooden flower pin he'd given her in the cabin. She'd carried it through everything: the escape, the confession, the arrest. "I think she'd want you to have this back." Swift River shook his head. "She made it for someone who could help flowers bloom again. That's you." Elena looked down at the carving. Such a small thing to carry so much meaning. "I don't know if I can do this," she admitted. "Build something new. Trust again." "Neither do I," Swift River said. "But maybe that's the point. Maybe healing isn't about knowing. Maybe it's about trying anyway." The singing around them grew louder, more voices joining the ancient melody. Elena pinned the wooden flower to her dress right over her heart. "When will I see you again?" "When the snow melts. Spring, maybe." Swift River's smile was soft, hopeful. "I'll bring you flowers from the sacred places, the ones that grow where the water runs clean." Elena nodded. Spring seemed like a reasonable time to fall in love. The ceremony ended as the sun set behind the mountains. Members of the tribe approached Swift River one by one, offering condolences and welcome. Elena stood apart, respectful of their privacy. But when a young woman approached her with a shy smile, offering a small bundle of herbs, Elena understood that she was no longer an outsider here. "For your clinic," the woman said in careful English, "medicine plants. From the old places." Elena accepted the gift with both hands. "Thank you." "My grandmother says you have the healing touch," the woman continued. "Says the spirits brought you here for a reason." Elena looked across the gathering to where Swift River stood with the tribal elders. He caught her eye and nodded slightly. Maybe the spirits had brought her here, or maybe it was just chance and stubbornness, and the simple human need to matter. Either way, she was ready to begin again. The mountain air was clean and thin. It burned her lungs with each breath. At least that was real. At least that was something she could feel. And for the first time in 3 years, Elena Whitmore was exactly where she belonged. December 1879, Colorado Territory. Snow fell like whispered prayers across the valley. Elena pulled her wool shawl tighter as she walked between the patient beds in her clinic. 3 months had passed since Cross's arrest. 3 months of building something new from the ashes of the old. The clinic sat in a meadow halfway between Fort Garland and the Ute winter camp. Adobe walls with wide windows. A stone chimney that sent smoke curling into the cold air. Large enough for 20 beds, small enough to feel like home. Dr. Whitmore, Maria Santos, no relation to Swift River's fictional identity, looked up from the bed where she was tending her son. "The fever, it is breaking." Elena moved to check the boy's temperature. 8 years old. The same age Singing Wind would have been. "The willow bark tea is working," Elena said. "Keep giving it to him every 4 hours." Maria nodded. Like many of the Mexican settlers, she'd been suspicious of Elena at first. A woman doctor was strange enough. A woman doctor who worked with Indians was nearly incomprehensible. But illness didn't care about prejudice, and healing spoke a language everyone understood. "Doctor," Private Morrison limped over from his bed near the window. "Got a letter for you, from Denver." Elena accepted the envelope with a frown. Few people knew her address here. Fewer still had reason to write. The return address made her blood run cold. Colorado Territorial Prison. Bad news, Maria asked. Elena forced a smile. Just army business, nothing important. But her hands shook as she tucked the letter into her apron pocket. The rest of the morning passed in routine, checking wounds, dispensing medicine, teaching Maria's daughter how to properly clean and bandage cuts. It wasn't until noon that Elena found time to read the letter. She sat alone in her small office behind the main clinic room. Through the window, she could see the mountains rising white and sharp against the winter sky. The letter was brief, written in a careful hand she didn't recognize. Dr. Whitmore, my name is Thomas Wright. I am Dr. Cross's attorney. My client wishes to speak with you before his execution next month. He claims to have information vital to your safety. He will only speak to you in person. Please respond at your earliest convenience. Respectfully, T. Wright Esky. Elena read the letter 3 times before its meaning fully sank in. Cross was going to die. She should have felt relief, justice, some sense of closure. Instead, she felt only dread. That evening, Elena sat by her fireplace staring at the letter. Outside, wind howled down from the peaks. The clinic was empty except for Private Morrison, who'd stayed to help with the night watch. What could Cross possibly want to tell her? What information could be vital to her safety when he was locked in a cell awaiting execution? A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Elena opened the door to find a young Ute woman standing in the swirling snow. She was perhaps 16 with intelligent eyes and traditional dress beneath a heavy winter coat. Dr. Whitmore, I am Little Fox, Swift River's niece. Elena's heart jumped. Is something wrong? No, he is well. Little Fox stepped inside, shaking snow from her hair. He sent me with a message. Elena closed the door and gestured toward the fire. What message? Little Fox pulled a small wrapped bundle from her coat. Inside was another wooden carving, this one of a bird in flight. He says to tell you that spring comes early to the sacred places, Little Fox said, and that he will return with the first thaw. Elena turned the carving over in her hands. The craftsmanship was exquisite. Every feather detailed, every line perfect. How is he? Healing. The elders say his spirit grows stronger each day. Little Fox studied Elena's face. He speaks of you often. Elena felt warmth spread through her chest. What does he say? That you are the woman who makes flowers bloom in winter. Little Fox smiled. And that when he returns, he will not leave again. Elena's breath caught. He said that. His exact words were, tell her I have found my home. It is wherever she is. The wooden bird felt warm in Elena's hands, like a promise, like hope. Will you stay the night? Elena asked. The storm is getting worse. Little Fox shook her head. I must return before my absence is noticed, but Swift River said to give you this as well. She handed Elena another small object, a key old and tarnished. What is it for? The cabin where you saved Sarah Montgomery. He says it belongs to you now. A place to go when the world becomes too heavy. Elena stared at the key, the cabin where she'd first begun to trust, where she'd learned that healing meant more than just treating wounds. Thank you, she whispered. Little Fox nodded and moved toward the door. Dr. Whitmore Swift River also said to tell you if anyone from your past tries to contact you, be very careful. He said you would understand. The letter in Elena's pocket seemed to burn against her leg. I understand. After Little Fox left, Elena sat by the fire for a long time holding the wooden bird and the old key. Outside the storm raged, but inside, surrounded by the tools of healing and the promise of spring, Elena felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Peace. It lasted exactly 12 hours. The next morning brought visitors. Elena was checking on Private Morrison's leg wound when she heard horses outside. 3 riders moving fast despite the snow. She looked out the window and felt her blood turn to ice. Federal marshals, and they were heading straight for her clinic. Dr. Whitmore. The lead marshal was a tall man with a gray beard and tired eyes. Marshal Roberts, we need to speak with you. Elna stepped outside, pulling her shawl around her shoulders. What can I do for you, Marshal? It's about Dr. Marcus Cross, also known as Major Cross, also known as... Roberts consulted a small notebook. Dr. Marcus Thorne of Boston. What about him? He's dead. Elena felt the world tilt. Dead. But his execution isn't for another month. Killed in his cell 3 nights ago. Stabbed by another prisoner. Roberts' expression was grim. But before he died, he managed to write something. Your name. And this location. The marshal handed her a piece of paper. Elena's hands trembled as she unfolded it. Written in Cross's familiar handwriting, Elena Whitmore, Valley Clinic. She must know about Kane. Kane. Elena looked up. Who's Kane? That's what we hoped you could tell us. Robert stepped closer. Dr. Cross left some other materials in his cell, evidence about his activities here in Colorado, but most of it doesn't make sense without context. Elena's mind raced. Kane. The name was familiar, but she couldn't place it. What kind of evidence? Maps, names, financial records. Roberts gestured to one of his companions who brought over a leather satchel. But there's something else. Something he specifically wanted you to see. Elena opened the satchel. Inside were photographs, dozens of them. The first few showed the Cherokee mine, the poisoned stream, bodies lying beside contaminated water. But the later photographs were different. They showed men, white men in civilian clothes, standing beside the mine entrance, pointing and talking. Elena studied the faces. Most were strangers, but one, her blood went cold. That's Jedediah Kane, Marshal Roberts said quietly. Leader of the gang that attacked Silverdale. Elena stared at the photograph. The man was tall and lean with pale eyes and a cruel mouth. But it wasn't his appearance that made her hands shake. It was what he was holding. A small red leather book. Sarah's book, Elena whispered. What? Elena looked up at the marshal. Sarah Montgomery had a book. Evidence about the mine. She said her husband found it, and that's why they were killed. This book, Roberts pulled another photograph from the satchel. This one showed Kane opening the red book, its pages clearly visible. Yes. Elena felt sick. But how does Cross have photographs of Kane with the book Sarah died with it in her possession? Roberts and his companions exchanged glances. Dr. Whitmore. Roberts said carefully, when exactly did Sarah Montgomery die? 3 months ago, the night Cross's men attacked the cabin where we were hiding. Ma'am? Roberts's voice was gentle but firm. Sarah Montgomery died at Silverdale. In the initial attack, her body was identified by dental records 2 weeks ago. The world stopped. Elena stared at the marshal, her mind refusing to process what he'd said. That's impossible. I treated her. I spoke with her. She told me about the book about her husband. Oh wait, the woman you treated wasn't Sarah Montgomery. Elena sat down hard on the clinic steps. Snow soaked through her dress, but she couldn't feel the cold. Then who was she? Roberts pulled out another photograph. This one showed a woman Elena recognized. Dark hair, pale skin, intelligent eyes. But the name written on the back made Elena's world collapse entirely. Catherine Cross, age 32, wife of Dr. Marcus Cross. Elena stared at the photograph until the marshal's voice seemed to come from very far away. Dr. Cross's wife disappeared from Boston 3 years ago, same time you fled the city. Robert sat down beside her on the steps. We think she discovered what her husband was doing and tried to stop him. Elena's mind reeled. The woman she'd treated, the woman she tried to save. Catherine must have followed Cross to Colorado. Roberts continued. We found evidence in his cell that she'd been gathering information about the mine operation for months. She was working against him. Elena's voice was barely a whisper. It appears so, and when Cross realized what she was doing, he had her killed. Elena finished the thought, her heart breaking. But why pretend to be Sarah Montgomery? Protection, maybe. Or she thought you'd be more likely to trust a survivor than the wife of the man you were running from. Elena thought about that night in the cabin, the way Catherine had looked at her with such understanding, the careful way she'd revealed information about Cross. She'd been trying to save Elena, even knowing it would cost her life. There's more, Roberts said gently. The evidence we found in Cross's cell, it suggests Kane is still active. Still running operations connected to the mine. Elena looked up sharply. The mine is closed. The Cherokee mine, yes, But there are others, smaller operations, and Kane has been using them to fund something bigger. Roberts pulled out a map from the satchel. It showed the Colorado Territory with several locations marked in red ink. Army supply routes, he explained. Kane's been planning coordinated attacks on military convoys, not just robbery, something more systematic. Elena studied the map. One of the marked locations was less than 20 miles from her clinic. You think he'll come here? We think he already has. Robert stood and pointed toward the mountains. Elena followed his gaze and saw what she'd missed before. Smoke, thin and distant but definitely there, rising from the direction of the old cabin. The cabin's swift river had given her the key to. How long has that been burning? Elena asked. Since yesterday, according to the fort's lookouts. Roberts' hand moved to his gun. Dr. Whitmore, we have reason to believe Kane is using that location as a base of operations. Elena's blood went cold. Little Fox, one of you Swift River's niece. She came here last night to deliver a message. Elena stood quickly. She would have passed right by that cabin on her way back to the winter camp. The marshals exchanged grim looks. Ma'am, Robert said carefully, we need you to stay here. Let us handle this. But Elena was already moving toward the clinic. Private Morrison, get the horses ready. Dr. Whitmore, this is not. That girl is 16 years old. Elena spun to face the marshal. And if Kane has her, she's probably the only witness to whatever he's planning. She disappeared into the clinic and emerged moments later with her medical bag and a rifle. You can come with me or follow behind, she told Roberts, but I'm going to that cabin. The marshal looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded to his companions. Mount up, he said. We ride hard and we ride ready. Elena pulled herself onto her horse and looked one last time at the clinic, at the place she'd built from hope and determination, at the life she might be leaving behind. Then she spurred her horse toward the mountains, toward the smoke, toward whatever waited in the ruins of the place where she'd first learned to trust. The cabin was exactly as Elena remembered it, except for the blood. Elena dismounted 50 yards away, her heart hammering against her ribs. Marshal Roberts and his men spread out in a wide circle, weapons drawn. The front door stood open. Dark stains marked the wooden steps and porch boards. Stay behind us, Roberts whispered. They approached the cabin like hunters stalking dangerous prey, every step careful, every shadow suspect. Elena could smell it now, the metallic scent of blood mixed with wood smoke and something else, something sweet and cloying. Death. Roberts reached the door first. He peered inside, then motioned for the others to follow. The main room was chaos, furniture overturned, bullet holes in the walls, and in the center of it, all three bodies. Elena forced herself to look. Two men she didn't recognize, both wearing the rough clothes of frontier outlaws, both very dead. But the third body made her knees buckle. Little Fox lay near the fireplace, her traditional dress torn and bloody. Her eyes were closed, her breathing so shallow it was barely visible. She's alive, Elena breathed. She rushed to the girl's side, medical instincts taking over. Pulse weak but steady. Multiple stab wounds, but none immediately fatal. Blood loss was the main concern. Little Fox, can you hear me? The girl's eyes fluttered open. When she saw Elena, she tried to sit up. Dr. Whitmore, had to warn you. Shh, don't try to talk. You're hurt. Kane, he knows about Swift River. Little Fox gripped Elena's arm with surprising strength. He's coming. For you. Elena looked around the cabin, at the overturned furniture, the bullet holes, the bodies. What happened here? They were waiting. When I came back from your clinic, Little Fox's voice was growing weaker. 3 of them said they knew Swift River was planning to return. Elena's blood went cold. How could they know that? Someone told them, someone who knew about the message. Elena's mind raced. Only a few people had known about Swift River's planned return. Little Fox, the tribal elders, and whoever had been watching the clinic. Dr. Whitmore, Marshal Roberts appeared beside her. We need to move, now. She's too weak to travel. Then she'll die here, because Kane's not finished. As if summoned by his words, the sound of approaching horses drifted through the open door. Roberts moved to the window and cursed under his breath. How many? Elena asked. 8, maybe 10. Roberts checked his weapons. We're outnumbered. Elena looked down at Little Fox. The girl was unconscious again, her breathing labored. There was no way to move her safely, no time to treat her wounds properly, and nowhere to run. The root cellar, Elena said suddenly. What? Behind the fireplace, there's a tunnel that leads to the creek. Elena began gathering medical supplies from her bag. You and your men can hold them off while I get Little Fox to safety. Roberts shook his head. I'm not leaving you here. You're not. You're buying me time. The sound of horses grew closer. Elena could hear men's voices, now harsh and commanding. Marshal! One of Roberts's deputies appeared in the doorway. They're surrounding the cabin. Elena made her decision. She gathered Little Fox in her arms, surprised by how light the girl was. Moving as quickly as she dared, she carried her toward the fireplace. Give me 10 minutes, she told Roberts. Then do whatever you have to do. Roberts nodded grimly. 10 minutes. Elena pushed aside the loose stone and squeezed into the narrow tunnel, Little Fox cradled against her chest. Behind her, she heard Roberts calling out to his men. Federal marshals, throw down your weapons. The response was immediate and violent. Gunfire erupted like thunder. Elena crawled through the tunnel as fast as she could, following the path she'd taken 3 months ago when she'd been running from a different set of killers. But this time she wasn't running for herself. This time she was carrying the future in her arms. Elena emerged from the tunnel beside the creek, gasping and covered in dirt. Little Fox was unconscious, her breathing shallow but steady. Elena laid her gently on the snow-covered bank and began working on her wounds. Behind them, the gunfire continued, sharp cracks echoing off the mountain walls. Elena tried not to think about Marshal Roberts and his men, tried not to count the shots or calculate the odds. She had work to do. Little Fox had 3 stab wounds, one in her side barely missing vital organs, one in her shoulder deep but clean, and one across her ribs that looked worse than it was. Elena cleaned and bandaged each wound with practiced efficiency. The girl was strong young. She would survive, if they both lived long enough. The gunfire stopped. Elena looked up from her work, listening to the sudden silence. Had Roberts won? Were Kane's men dead? Or... The sound of footsteps crashing through the underbrush answered her question. Someone was coming, moving fast and careless. Elena pulled Little Fox deeper into the shadows beneath a fallen log. She checked her rifle, making sure it was loaded and ready. The footsteps grew closer. Elena held her breath and waited. A figure crashed through the trees and stopped at the creek's edge. Male, tall, wearing a long coat and a wide-brimmed hat. He turned, scanning the area. Elena saw his face and her world stopped. It wasn't Kane. It was Swift River. Elena! His voice carried desperate relief. Elena, where are you? She stood up so quickly she nearly fell. Here I'm here. Swift River splashed across the creek and gathered her into his arms. Elena felt the solid warmth of him, the strength that had sustained her through everything. I thought I was too late, he whispered against her hair. How did you know Little Fox never came home? When the smoke started rising from the cabin, he pulled back to look at her. Are you hurt? No, but Little Fox. I know. I can see her wounds. Swift River knelt beside his niece, his hands gentle as he checked Elena's bandages. Good work. She'll live. What about the marshals? Swift River's expression darkened. Dead. All of them. Elena felt the world tilt. All of them. Kane had more men than they expected, set up crossfire positions around the cabin. Swift River stood, his hand moving to the knife at his belt. Kane knows we're here. He's coming. Then we run. No. Swift River's voice was flat, final. This ends here. Elena stared at him. You can't face 10 men alone. I won't be alone. As if summoned by his words, more figures emerged from the trees. Ute warriors painted for war, moving like shadows through the forest. How many? Elena asked. Enough. Swift River touched her face gently. Take Little Fox and go upstream. There's a cave about half a mile north. Wait for us there. I'm not leaving you. Elena. No. She gripped his arm. I lost Catherine because I wasn't there to help her. I'm not losing you too. Swift River searched her face. Something passed between them, understanding perhaps, or acceptance. Then stay close, he said, and try not to get killed. Elena checked her rifle again. Same to you. The sound of approaching horses drifted through the trees. Swift River signaled to his warriors. They melted back into the forest, becoming part of the landscape. Remember, Swift River said quietly, Kane wants you alive. That gives us an advantage. Elena nodded, though she wasn't sure she believed him. The horses grew closer. Swift River disappeared into the trees. Elena was alone with an unconscious girl and the sound of her own heartbeat. The final confrontation was about to begin. Kane arrived like a plague. Elena watched from her hiding place as 10 mounted men rode into the clearing beside the creek. They moved with military precision, spreading out to cover all escape routes. Kane himself was exactly as Elena had imagined. Tall and lean with pale eyes that seemed to catalog everything they saw. He wore a black coat and carried himself like a man accustomed to command. Dr. Elena Whitmore. His voice carried easily across the water. I know you're here. Come out and no one else needs to die. Elena stayed hidden beneath the fallen log. Little Fox stirred beside her, consciousness returning. Dr. Whitmore? Kane called again. I have something that belongs to you. One of his men dragged a bound figure into view. Elena's heart stopped. It was Marshal Roberts. Wounded, bloody, but alive. You have 30 seconds to show yourself, Kane continued, or I start cutting pieces off the good Marshal here. Elena closed her eyes. She could stay hidden. Let Roberts die. Save herself and Little Fox. She'd made the choice before in Boston. Chosen documentation over action. Not again. Elena stood up. I'm here. Kane smiled. It was the most terrible thing Elena had ever seen. Dr. Elena Whitmore, at last we meet properly. Kane dismounted and walked to the creek's edge. You've caused me considerable trouble. Good, Kane laughed. Such spirit. I can see why Marcus was so fond of you. Elena stepped out from behind the log, her rifle held ready. What do you want? The same thing Marcus wanted. Your cooperation. Kane gestured to his men. You see, the good doctor's death has created certain complications in my business arrangements. What business? The business of war, my dear doctor. Specifically, the coming war between the United States and her Indian population. Elena felt sick. You're trying to start a war. I'm trying to finish one. The government's been too soft, too willing to negotiate. Kane's eyes glittered with fanatic fervor. But with the right provocations, the right atrocities, well, public opinion can be quite malleable. Like Silverdale. Silverdale was just the beginning. A test, you might say. Kane pulled out a small book, the same red book Sarah Catherine had died protecting. Marcus was kind enough to provide detailed maps of every Indian settlement in Colorado Territory. Elena's blood went cold. You're planning more massacres. I'm planning solutions. Quick, efficient, final solutions to the Indian problem. Kane tucked the book back into his coat. And you're going to help me? Never. Oh, but you are. You see, I've learned quite a bit about your relationship with our local Ute population, specifically with the man they call Swift River. Kane's smile widened. Did you really think he could approach undetected? My men have been watching this area for hours. Elena's heart sank. That's right, my dear doctor. Your savage lover and his warriors are walking into a trap. As if summoned by Kane's words, gunfire erupted from the trees around the clearing. But not the way Kane had expected. Instead of Ute war cries, Elena heard the distinctive whistle of arrows finding their targets. Instead of his men's victorious shouts, she heard screams of pain and confusion. Kane spun around, his confidence evaporating. What? An arrow sprouted from the shoulder of the man guarding Marshal Roberts. The marshal rolled away as his captor fell. More arrows followed, precise, deadly, launched from positions Kane's men couldn't see. Impossible, Kane breathed. We had them surrounded. Swift River's voice drifted from the trees, speaking in fluent English. You surrounded the positions we wanted you to surround. Elena felt a fierce surge of pride. Swift River had outmaneuvered them completely. Kane's remaining men tried to return fire, but they were shooting at shadows. The Ute warriors had become part of the forest itself. "Kill the woman!" Kane shouted. "Kill her now!" One of his men turned toward Elena, rifle raised. Elena dropped to one knee and fired. The man pitched backward into the creek. Kane pulled his own gun and pointed it at Elena's chest. "You want to play war, Doctor? Let's play war." His finger tightened on the trigger. Swift River materialized behind him like a ghost. Kane had just enough time to register his presence before Swift River's knife found his throat. An hour later, the clearing was quiet. Elena knelt beside Marshal Roberts, checking his wounds. The marshal was conscious but weak, bleeding from multiple cuts and a bullet graze across his ribs. "You'll live," she told him, "but you need rest and proper medical attention." Roberts nodded weakly. "Kane." Elena looked toward the creek where Swift River stood over the outlaw leader's body. "Dead." "Good." Roberts closed his eyes. "His men also dead, except for two who escaped." Elena finished bandaging the marshal's wounds. "Swift River's warriors are tracking them." "And Little Fox?" Elena glanced toward the fallen log where Little Fox sat pale but alert. The girl was young and strong. She would recover completely. "She'll be fine." Robert struggled to sit up. "Dr. Whitmore, there's something you need to know. About Kane's plans." Elena helped him lean against a tree. "What about them?" "He wasn't working alone. The attacks he was planning, they were funded by people in Washington, politicians who want to see the Indian Wars escalate." Elena felt cold despite the afternoon sun. "How do you know?" "Found documents in Kane's saddlebags. Names, dates, bank transfers." Roberts pulled a blood-stained envelope from his coat. "This needs to reach the territorial governor immediately." Elena took the envelope. It felt heavy in her hands, heavy with the weight of more secrets, more corruption. "Will it make a difference?" "It might, if the right people see it." Roberts looked at her seriously. "People like you. People who understand that healing sometimes means exposing infections." Elena nodded slowly. She understood. Swift River approached his warriors behind him. They moved like men who had done necessary but unpleasant work. "The other two won't be troubling anyone," he said simply. Elena didn't ask for details. Some questions were better left unanswered. "What now?" she asked. Swift River looked at Marshal Roberts, then at Little Fox, then back at Elena. "Now we go home." "Which home?" Swift River's smile was soft, hopeful. "The one we build together." Elena thought about her clinic in the valley, about the patients who depended on her, about the life she'd started to create in this hard, beautiful country. Then she thought about Swift River's promise to return with the spring thaw, about wooden flowers and healing touch and the possibility of love growing in the aftermath of violence. "Together," she agreed. Swift River offered his hand. Elena took it, letting him pull her to her feet. Around them, the mountains rose white and eternal against the winter sky. The creek flowed clear and cold, washing away the blood from the day's violence. Somewhere in the distance, Elena could hear birds singing. Spring was still months away, but for the first time in years, Elena could feel it coming, could feel hope taking root in the frozen ground of her heart. Swift River squeezed her hand gently. "Come," he said. "Let's go home." Elena nodded. Together they began the long walk back to the valley, back to the clinic where healing happened one patient at a time, back to the life they would build from the ashes of everything that had come before. The wooden flower pin over Elena's heart caught the afternoon light as they walked. Behind them, the creek sang its ancient song. Ahead of them, the future waited.